Hola. Salam alaikum. And namaste. I'm Pamela Sparr, co-chair of the Transformation Committee at All Souls Church Unitarian in Washington, D.C. And our congregation proudly became the third UU church in the nation to adopt the 8th principle in December 2017. As many of you know, the principle commits us to do a lot more than giving lip service to promoting the beloved community and recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of everyone. It charges us with accountably dismantling racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. This vote was an important milestone in our 200-year history of working for racial justice and our 75-year history of espousing a goal of becoming a multicultural worshiping community. Ironically, a month after we formally adopted the 8th principle, the universe underscored the fact that we have a huge need for spiritual growth. Early in 2018, there was a very painful rupture between our two called ministers that also implicated our board of trustees and others in our management team. This also caused a great deal of mistrust, grief, and disaffection, particularly on the part of many of our members of color and a significant segment of our white members. If you were a doctor, you might say that the presenting symptom was the departure under questionable circumstances of our associate minister, a black woman, Reverend Dr. Susan Newman Moore, which gave rise to charges of both personal and institutional racism and sexism. The underlying diagnosis, though, also points to a congregation and a staff team that did and does not yet know how to deal well with conflict, which is a critical skill for being a multicultural community. The diagnosis also points to the fact that building a beloved community goes far beyond making progress in diversifying the demographics of who sits in the pew and having a really awesome multicultural music program. Although I must say personally, I feel really glad about our fantastic music program and how it facilitates and fortifies us to do the work we're being called to do. We're living in a time in the United States where there's a lot of box office hits that involve superheroes who save people from evil and other forms of danger. But now, as white Unitarian Universalists, we're being called to save ourselves. And this is how we're trying to do it at All Souls. Undertaking a top-to-bottom assessment of white supremacy culture in our church and planning structural change of that magnitude, as well as addressing the grief and broken relationships which are a result of that culture, is, as an understatement, a huge task. Church leaders began by hosting 3 different types of listening sessions involving more than 400 people. Volunteers sorted through 1,600 pieces of input, ideas, feelings, observations, categorizing them and issuing a public report as a first step in beginning to reestablish trust and accountability. Working groups formed based on key themes that came out of that listening process, and the groups were charged with developing a detailed analysis of the way things are, as well as to make concrete recommendations for changes, including a budget to match. In April of last year, our Board of Trustees created a transformation team with the mandate of advising and assisting the board on living into the 8th principle in the areas of personnel policies and selection, accountability measures, and changing our governance model away from policy governance. More broadly, we serve as a kind of container to help nurture, support, coach, and strategize with the working groups and fill in any gaps in what needs to be done. The board appointed 2 co-chairs, Paula Cole-Jones is the other, and tasked 6 active constituency groups with naming representatives in order to involve people representing a very wide swath of interests, experiences, and perspectives. The board also named a liaison, which would also be a member of the team, and today we actually have 2 board liaisons. We have a 2-year mandate with a possibility of an extension. It is too early in our process, I believe, to offer a lot of lessons, but here are a few key pieces of the spirit which we're bringing to the work. First, this is not a quick process. It's going to take years for all the changes to be identified and begun to be put in place. So we can't expect quick fixes. Patience, persistence, and committed people are necessary. 2, we admit we do not know what the future will look like. To do so is to be arrogant and foolhardy. This is an organic process which involves being humble, curious, open, and really committed to our values. 3, we can't be afraid to experiment or to make mistakes. We have to be willing to keep trying and keep staying in community. No one person has the answer, and we need each other's love, support, and perspective to grow. And finally, this process can be fun, engaging, and extremely meaningful. It is very deeply satisfying to witness our own spiritual growth and emotional growth and to enjoy deeper relationships at church as a result. One of the pieces of work that has the highest immediate priority is rebuilding trust in our congregation, and so I'd like to turn the mic over to Kyla Dixon, who chairs the Trust and Reconciliation Working Group, to provide some details about how her team operates.
The Trust and Reconciliation Work Group believes that earning trust and repairing relationships can only happen within the frame of structural change that recognizes and works to transform and undo the systems and dominant culture of white supremacy. Being grounded in the 8th principle guides us to accountably dismantle racism in our interpersonal relationships and within our congregation. We are and will be intentional about not reproducing the dominant culture that centers whiteness, but rather be grounded in a frame that listens to and tends the people and communities within all souls who have been marginalized. We are developing a spiritual practice of reconciliation, reaching out to those who may still be suffering as the result of the conflict. Well, we began our task listening in order to rebuild trust lost through the recent rupture. We discovered that there is a lingering, unaddressed legacy of hurt and grief within our congregation that is still alive and a product of living within a white supremacy culture. In reconciliation, we seek direct encounters, truth-telling, acknowledgement of impact, sincere apology, and shared agreements. When people engage with us, we see it as a spiritual act. It is a deep offering to be able to hear and hold another's truth. A baseline goal of these conversations is to make visible the pain and hurt people are holding. We believe in the power of ministering to one another and ask that those of us within the congregation who hold privilege sit with discomfort. When we remain silent or do nothing, people are isolated by grief. Instead of isolation, we are seeking ways for us to grieve together. Those of us who are white are responsible. It is our work to transform our culture, deepen our interconnectedness, and earn people's trust. Through this work, we are learning how to tend to the deep fractures and generations of scars caused by racism, exposed by conflict. As white people, we are conditioned to be comfortable, to avoid conflict at the expense of people of color. When we avoid conflict, we reinforce and reproduce the dominant culture. White people continue to worship on Sundays. White people continue to have a spiritual home, while people of color disappear from our churches. People of color are denied a spiritual home. And we are all denied a faith community that holds multiple truths and allows us to be our whole selves in all our complexities. So it starts with seeing and naming. We must build spiritual practices that allow us to recognize one another's pain and sit with discomfort. Then we must listen, deeply listen. Those of us with privilege have work to do to prepare ourselves for this deep listening. The spiritual work of opening ourselves and releasing our defenses, of centering ourselves in the humility of all we cannot see and do not know. We must change. We must change our structures and systems. We must change our culture and ways of relating to one another. This change requires us to be transparent, clear, and in accountable relationships. Finally, we must commit to doing this work over and over and over and over again. Our faith and values demand nothing less.